Good morning, everyone. It is October 14th. Going to talk about the war in Ukraine, looking at the battlefield across multiple areas, but I want to highlight something very specific. Earlier in August, Vladimir Putin set a deadline for the Russian military to do several things by the 1st of October. That included clearing Kursk, capturing Torsk, capturing Pokrovsk, capturing Chasiv Yar, and some other cities as well. Clearly that wasn't going to happen, so Vladimir Putin pushed the timeline out to the 15th. Well, tomorrow is the 15th, and we're just going to take a look and see exactly which of these various areas that Putin had said needed to be captured or have the Ukrainians evicted by tomorrow, and where they're at this point. So let's go ahead and zoom in and see where the Russians are at. Now, mind you, the Russians have taken a chunk of territory back. If you remember, the territory looked something like this, ran up along the river and then over and then back down to where it's currently sitting at. So the Russians have retaken a good chunk of the territory back, about, I'd say, 40% of the territory that Ukraine initially took from the Russians in Russian territory. But as you can see, the remaining territory right here is still firmly in Ukrainian hands, and they're not going to be evicted by the end of tomorrow. So once again, Putin either has to make a decision to extend the deadline or quietly let this get swept under the rug as not something he said, or take it on the chin that he gave this directive, this deadline, so to speak, and it just didn't get accomplished. So interestingly, as the Russians swept downwards and began pushing the Ukrainians eastward, the Ukrainians saw an opening. And as you can see here, there's a small section of blue forming, where as Russia focuses on this main effort here, the Ukrainians are now starting to press from the west into Russia. Will they form a new salient that begins to eat into this section of territory? I'm not sure. Nonetheless, by this deadline that was supposed to take place, Russia is not going to evict the Ukrainians completely from this Kursk axis. Now let's zoom out and take a look at some of these other areas. There's two main areas that were major tasks by Putin for them to take. The first was Chasiv Yar right here, and the second was Pokrovsk right here. So let's see where the Russians are at this point. Interestingly, the Russians have moved in to the outskirts, the suburbs of Chasiv Yar. You can see that the lines have moved to right here, but this line that we see here has been stagnant for probably 2 weeks now. Chasiv Yar still remains under the control of Ukraine, albeit very close to the front lines. But this front line, as I said, has not moved for many, many days. And ostensibly that means it's probably not going to move much more in the next 24 to 48 hours, meaning they aren't going to reach the deadline goal of Putin of taking Chasiv Yar. So let's look at the other place, the other major location, Pokrovsk. This was the main effort. You can see the major salient that has formed, but there's two key areas here. The first of which is the fact that the Ukrainians continue to maintain this small alcove, this town, and are able to successfully continue to defend against Russia far longer than even I expected them to be able to do so. I mean, you can see this salient that Russia has formed. It's a sliver of ground that Russia was able to use the terrain to essentially take. As you can see, there's like a reservoir here, and it forks into two areas. This made it very difficult for Ukraine to try to defend in here, but it also makes it difficult for Russia to cross over here, and Ukraine has prioritized apparently defending down here. So this salient for Ukraine remains weeks in place. I'm very surprised at how well the Ukrainians are defending here. Also, for the last week or so, we've seen the Ukrainians maintain Selidov right here. The Russians are trying to conduct a double envelopment, but seemingly not seeing a lot of successes. I still do think, and I've been proven wrong over the last couple of weeks on this area, that eventually Russia will muster the strength to close these off. Now, with regard to Putin's demands of what they should be doing by the 15th, they were supposed to take Pokrovsk. This is a major logistics hub for Ukraine. Many crossroads, rail networks come into this area. They're still not in a position to take Pokrovsk, not in the next 24 to 48 hours, probably not even in the next 1 to 2 weeks. As I've said several videos, these defenses along in this area are out in the open. It's hard for the Russians to cross this area with Ukrainian defense is so robust here. So what Russia has been prioritizing is trying to take small towns in and around the Pokrovsk area, trying to bound via these villages to get to Pokrovsk. Well, if you notice something, there ain't a whole lot of villages left in this region here for them to take. Sure, you have this one right here, but this is a wide open territory right here. And by wide open, I mean that's about 4 miles of open territory that they would have to cross in order to get to just the outskirts of Pokrovsk. And that is a tactically difficult situation, especially when Ukraine likely has pre-sighted an artillery, minefields, trenching systems, tank ditches, etc. Things that are just make it incredibly difficult for Russia to get to Pokrovsk. And Ukraine has had 18 months to build these defenses because they've always known that Pokrovsk was definitely going to be a target of Russia. Nonetheless, what we are looking at is abject failures to meet Putin's deadlines over and over again. Like I said, they were supposed to eject Ukraine from Kursk. Didn't happen. They were supposed to capture Chasiv Yar. Didn't happen. They were supposed to capture Pokrovsk. Didn't happen. So what will happen to those generals that have failed? What will happen to the Ministry of Defense? Will Putin just let this go? He's not really one to let things like this go. There might be some firings. Will Putin perhaps just extend the deadline yet again, given the tactical realities on ground? I don't know. Nonetheless, this is embarrassing for Putin, the Kremlin, and his regime in their attempt to gain some additional ground within Ukraine and retake territory that Ukraine has taken from Russia up near Kursk.